clear about this. At 11 o'clock, commercial flights were allowed. Private planes were still not allowed. In fact, there was any pilots here, you know, about a NOTAM, is that what they call it? Notice to all airmen, using the old sexist language. They came out at 10:57 saying, warning, airspace is only open for commercial flights. No private flights will be allowed. You will be forced down if you go up. The 9/11 Commission just says, no problem. American airspace was open at 11 o'clock on that day, and that flight didn't leave until 4:30 in the afternoon. That is the complete, you know, one of the strongest examples of the complete dishonesty. They have to know they're lying. And yet, they also know that most of the American people won't know any better, and so they'll get 5-star reviews on Amazon.com in spite of such things. FBI. There are so many stories about FBI obstruction of investigations and so on. One of these, the most famous one, is by Colleen Rowley. Remember, she was one of the Time Persons of the Year because she blew the whistle on this sabotage, she said, within the FBI headquarters, that they wanted to get into Moussaoui's laptop computer because they thought he was going to fly planes into the World Trade Center. So they applied for a FISA, F-I-S-A, permit to investigate. They knew FISA would give it to them. They've hardly ever turned down an application in history. So what does somebody in headquarters do? He sabotages it. He takes out the crucial information that shows that what the French authorities had shown, that Moussaoui had a connection to Al-Qaeda rebels in Chechnya. He deletes that and then sends it to the superior to him, and the superior looks at it and says, this won't fly, I won't even send it to FISA. That's sabotage, and Colleen Rowley then exposed it. You will find Colleen Rowley's name once in the book, but no reference at all to this flap, which was important enough to get her on the cover of Time magazine. That's an extreme example of omission. Likewise, many of you know the saga of Sibel Edmonds, who was propositioned by a fellow Turkish woman, and they were hired to do translations after 9/11. She found this woman was working for one of the foreign groups that they were supposed to be investigating. This woman was either not translating the materials or mistranslating it, that she and one of her superiors were smuggling materials out of the FBI and giving them to this organization. Sibel Edmonds testified for 3.5 hours to the commission, told them about all of this, told them that her colleague, Behruz, was participating in a message from Iran. They had an asset in Iran who told him prior to 9/11 that Osama bin Laden was planning to attack the United States. And they were told to shut up, just keep quiet about it. Behruz went in and testified for 2 hours, and you can be sure he told about all this. His name is not even mentioned in the 9/11 report. Her name is mentioned once in a note in which it says she was one of 4 people who recommended that the FBI should tighten up its procedures. Pakistan and the ISI. The ISI is Intelligence Services, and it was set up by the CIA. And you see, if there were evidence then that the ISI were involved in 9/11, that might suggest that the CIA was involved in 9/11. So it would be very important to keep any such information away. Well, Mahmoud Ahmed, the head of the ISI, how many of you know this, was in Washington the week prior to 9/11, meeting with George Tenet, head of CIA. No mention of this. They mentioned that he showed up on the 13th, probably to come over and give condolences and say, what can I do to help? But there's no mention that he was there prior to 9/11. there's no mention that he and Tenet were meeting 5 days before the leader of the Northern Alliance, Masood Ahmad, was assassinated, and according to the Northern Alliance, by the ISI. And that made things easy then when we went in there, because there were no leaders to challenge what the American government wanted to put in place. Then word came from India that this same chief of the head of the ISI had ordered another ISI agent to wire $100,000 to Muhammad Atta shortly before 9/11. So here you have the ISI up to its eyeballs in 9/11 planning. Not a single mention of any of this. And here's it shows the other. They said we found no evidence of any foreign government funding. And of course, when you get to the back of the book, what are the recommendations? Continued cooperation and funding of Pakistan, and of course, continued cooperation with Saudi Arabia. So, in other words, you start with the back of the book and look at the recommendations, and then you can figure out what they're going to discover was the truth about 9/11. In other words, this was all, to get to our topic, this was not truth-driven. This was politics-driven. The whole report is politically driven, not driven by a desire for truth. No mention of the fact that Daniel Pearl, Wall Street Journal reporter, was murdered by ISI. No mention that this other guy that Posner says that Abu fingered, as somebody in Pakistan who knew about 9/11 ahead of time, also died. Oh, I forgot to tell you about Posner's story. He mentioned 3 members of the royal family who were the ones who knew about him and knew about 9/11. All 3 of them die within an 8-day period. And that was, according to Posner and Unger, just after the CIA had told Saudi intelligence about these 3 guys. So Prince Ahmed, who's 41 years old, suddenly dies of a heart attack. The second guy dies the next day in a single car accident on his way to Ahmed's funeral. And then my favorite is that the young guy, who was only 21, died of thirst. He went out into the desert, and just being 21 years old, he probably just forgot, in the desert you need water. And no mention of any of these anomalies in the 9/11 report, as if, gee, this is something strange we should look into. Okay. So the same thing happened in Pakistan then. This Mir died in one of these flights, even though the plane had just been checked. Of course, that was probably the problem. It had just been checked. Yeah. No mention that another ISI agent in 1999 had looked at the World Trade Center. He was being taped and said, those towers are coming down. So this is a long-term plan, if that story is true. No mention in there about all the motives. If you're going to say, well, maybe the U.S. government was involved, you'd say, well, why? You need a motive. Cui bono? Who benefits? No mention of the fact that the United States government had a big appetite and big plans. So why did we attack Iraq? Let's go to Afghanistan. Well, we were concerned about peace and human rights. Now, if you read any of the books, it's all about the pipeline wars, to put in the gas and oil pipelines to bring down gas from the Caspian Sea, which may be the 3rd largest oil and gas reserves in the world, and be able to bring them down through Pakistan and Afghanistan so they don't have to go through Iran or Russia. And Unocal was leading the consortium to do this. So read Rashid's book on the Taliban tells all about that. It has 2 chapters about romancing the Taliban, how we were working with the Taliban to try to bring this off. No mention of that. No mention that the 3 people who were in charge of our defenses on 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld, General Myers, he was in charge coincidentally just because Henry Shelton had to go to Europe. So Myers was in charge. And Eberhard, who's the head of NORAD,